Hi everyone, my name is Justin Pluck. I'm a Senior Manager of Solutions Architecture at AWS. In this video, I'm going to review the top 5 preventative controls for startups building on AWS. For our agenda today, we're first going to talk about what are preventative controls and why startups should implement them. Next, I'll provide an overview of service control policies and resource control policies. Then we'll discuss the top 5 preventative controls for startups in AWS. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some QR codes to get you started. At AWS, we support startups across all stages of growth, from iterating on minimum viable products to those that are looking to exit via IPOs or acquisitions. Startups need to be able to quickly iterate on minimum viable products while they strive to achieve product market fit. Startup organizations are very fluid, with new engineers frequently joining, many wearing multiple hats to get the work completed. Early-stage startups often haven't hired DevOps engineers yet to manage the cloud environment, so they need easy-to-implement solutions to keep them secure. Preventative controls allow developers to configure one-time policies that protect their intellectual property and data. Once a startup has achieved product market fit, we recommend that they adopt multiple AWS accounts to separate their production customer data from their development environments through the use of AWS Organizations. By using AWS Organizations and multiple AWS accounts, it is easier for startups to manage access, understand costs, and leverage features such as service control policies and resource control policies, which I'll talk about now. Service control policies, also known as SCPs, are principal-centric controls used to define the maximum available permissions to the identity and access management principles in your organization. IAM principles are IAM users for human access, and IAM roles for services such as Lambda execution roles, ECS tax execution roles, and EKS pod identity roles. They can be applied to the root, organization unit, or member account levels within AWS organizations. Resource control policies, also known as RCPs, are resource-centric controls used to define the maximum available permissions for the AWS resources in your organization. They can be applied to the root, organization unit, or the member account level. There are many use cases where SCPs and RCPs can be effectively and efficiently used to enforce access controls. For example, SCP use cases include the ability to prevent identities from accessing external resources, limiting AWS regions, and to protect cloud platform resources. And RCP use cases include the ability to prevent access to your resources by external identities and to apply controls on sensitive resources. Next, we're going to walk through the top 5 preventative controls for AWS startups. We're going to go through a few SCPs, one to only allow usage of approved AWS regions. Another will prevent usage of the root credentials in any of your member accounts. Third, will prevent member accounts from disabling certain security services. Fourth, we'll look at an RCP that can enforce secure transport protocol across a set of services. And then finally, we'll look at an SCP that denies changes to the S3 block public access. So first, we're going to look at a service control policy that only allows the usage of approved AWS regions. Now, when people are just getting started, oftentimes you're only building in one AWS region anyways. So it's a best practice to implement a policy such as this that would just prevent any usage of any AWS region except for the ones that you're expecting. If you scan the QR code up above, you'll see the whole policy. This whole policy actually does not fit on this one slide, so you'll want to review the documentation to view the latest set of IAM actions that goes into this policy. But basically what this policy will do is it will only allow access to the IAM, to the various AWS resources in the regions that you allow, and it will deny access to any of the resources in other regions. The next policy that we recommend that startups implement is denying usage of the root credentials in member accounts. So what this policy does is you have the management and payer account, which is your main account for your AWS organization. And then as you start creating additional accounts just for, say, non-production environment or shared services use cases, you want to prevent the ability for the root credential to perform any actions in those member accounts. And so generally there's no reason for the root credential to be able to do anything in those member accounts, and it's just a good security practice to have a policy such as this that denies usage of the root credential in any of those member accounts. The next policy we're going to look at is a service control policy, and again, if you scan the QR code here, you'll get to the documentation that has the full policy on the page. But this policy will deny any changes to certain security services such as AWS CloudTrail, AWS Config, Amazon GuardDuty, except if they are used coming from a certain privilege role, which you can see the exclusion criteria down at the bottom of the policy in the IAM condition. But these are good policies to have in place in case, just to prevent any malicious tampering in any of your member accounts, to potentially disable or stop any security services. Next, we're going to look at a resource control policy. So again, the previous policies we all looked at were all service control policies, so those were governing the principals in your organization. This policy is a resource control policy, and it governs a subset of AWS services as of now. So in this example, this policy will govern S3, the Simple Token Service, SQS, Secrets Manager, and the Key Management Service, and will basically mandate that all access to those services must be over HTTPS, and if anyone tries to access those services over HTTP, the request will be denied. So again, this is a good policy to implement to prevent any kind of man-in-the-middle attacks or anybody sniffing, any of the access that might be going on between where your applications or developers are and where those services reside. The last policy we're going to look at is another service control policy. So this is a service control policy that will deny changes to the S3 block public access feature. So you can turn on at an account or a bucket level to protect all of the S3 buckets in your account, that you can basically prevent any of those buckets from being made publicly accessible. And so generally this is a good thing to have, and there are a few use cases to where you may want S3 buckets to be public, but in general we have and recommend other approaches besides having public S3 buckets. So in this case, you can turn on this condition or accept, and you can also again exclude certain principal roles if you would like them to have the ability to modify these settings in this policy. But in general, this kind of policy will prevent changes to again, being able to modify that public access block setting for S3. And then finally, these are two QR codes that will take you to some additional examples in a public GitHub repo repository that we have that shows different examples of service control policies and resource control policies. Great, and with that, we're up today. Again, if you have any additional questions, feel free to work with your AWS account teams to next steps, or to do a deep dive into some of our data perimeter materials that we have available. And again, thank you for the time today.